affairs. Facts and opinion. Their future in our hands. Markets. Globalist technocrats versus the people. A line in the sand. The McIntyre Report.
And welcome, folks, to McIntyre Report special episode here, what we call an educational episode. We talk about topics that relate to Australian National Review readers. You can follow all our 24-hour news headlines, ANR.news. But the topic today we'll be talking about is, should we, with the decline of the West and possibly the rapid decline of the West, and as you follow Australian National Review, you'll be up to speed on geopolitics and our big belief that the BRICS is the future, a multipolar world that we support here at Independent Media. We certainly do not support a one world-led government by a bunch of psychopaths out of a fake state created in 1948, if you can guess who that is, both left and right, that controls the Western vassal states, including Australia. So the writing is on the wall. Some have seen it, including myself, and have left Australia already. But should people at least relocate their money or themselves out of the West? That's the topic for today. And today I'll be joined by two individuals. First of all, Warren Black. Welcome, Warren, to the show. Warren, obviously we've known each other for decades. You used to speak at 21st Century events. Many Australian National Review readers would recall you from those days. Others wouldn't. So welcome to the show. Also, I want to welcome Dave Oneggs. Obviously, Dave needs no introduction to Australian National Review followers. So guys, today let's talk a little bit about, should we be relocating ourselves or at least our money, some of our money out of the West, considering what's happening. So I might start with you, Warren. What's your view on what's going to happen over the next few years in the West? And is the writing on the wall, should people already be considering either relocating themselves or their money out of the West?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Look, I've known you for a long time. I'm a qualified lawyer, accountant, planner. I actually unlicensed myself a while ago in Australia because of the absurdities that I was seeing going on. And honestly, it's a bit like COVID. It wasn't difficult to work out what was happening because to put it very simply, generally what's happened before tends to repeat itself. And every time you have these kind of supposed virus, pandemic things, people locked down and things like that. The fact is, every time civilization collapses happen, the blueprint is pretty straightforward. And there was a book written years ago called The Sovereign Individual by Lord Rees-Mogg and William Davidson, written in 1995, which gave the blueprint of the Roman Empire collapse, and they compared it to Western civilization. And they gave a series of steps that would likely happen in the next 30 odd years. So far, we're following it to the letter. And I think the simple thing to always look at is, number one, if we're following the blueprint to the letter, is it likely we'll get the same outcome? And I think the answer is like 90, 95, 100%, we're going to get the same outcome. And it generally ends badly. In 2018, I was in Panama seeing firsthand people fleeing Venezuela to get out of there. And by then it was too late. You couldn't get your money out. There was nothing you could do. Money was trapped in Venezuela. All you could do was flee, rebuild your ruined life, and then basically send money back to your people. And Australia, anyone who's got money of any kind has either relocated and left Australia by now, or they're at least setting themselves up with plan Bs. And I'm really just doing with my clients what I would call last call webinars. I don't think we've got much time. 2015, I gave a big webinar on this exact issue. I talked on the sovereign individual and the Roman Empire collapse. I compared how we were following it to the letter. And now we've entered almost the final stages, according to the Rees-Mogg and Davidson blueprint, which is governments just blatantly seizing wealth with no regard for law anymore. And when that starts happening, the next steps inevitably are going to be, as people start fleeing and a flood, that they're going to start stopping people moving money out because they won't be able to keep the country afloat and the scam going. So I think we're 1 to 2 years away, most likely, from where you won't even be able to do this kind of stuff we're talking about today and do what you've done, Jamie, to relocate, or not do it without leaving virtually penniless and with nothing, as happened in Zimbabwe and places. That's a pretty radical view. But COVID, I was saying in COVID in 2020, how bad it would get. All my friends were laughing at me, saying I was a fruitcake. 2 years later, nobody was laughing. And I hope I'm wrong, but this is the time to take action. Get out, get yourself a plan B, or if you're going to stay in Australia, at least have your insurance policy, which you can activate basically in a quick fix. Like you can get yourself out of the country, move to somewhere like Bali, which is close to Australia, or Thailand. But yes, I'm telling clients at the very least, you want your insurance policy ready to do at a moment's notice, because I don't think we've got much time left where you won't be able to do it. I know
Yeah,
it's
it's interesting. Yeah, it's certainly interesting to say those things, Warren, because I like the word insurance policy, because we have, house insurance or health insurance, to protect a minimal percentage chance of something might go wrong. But I'm surprised about it. Even wealthy friends I've got in Australia, it's completely oblivious. They knew COVID, something was up, but they went back to sleep. They don't have all their assets in Australia. And what I've warned people is, it's interesting you say that the time frame 1 or 2 years, which is kind of what I'm thinking. The US empire is due to expire. They generally last 250 years, which is what, July 4th next year, and it seems to be on track. A lot of people hope with Trump there'd be a political revolution and make America great again, but sadly and disappointingly and frustratingly for many people, we've seen him become MAGA and continue to make Israel great at the expense of America. So it's pretty clear America had its last chance to save itself, and it hasn't. So the empire, I think we all could agree on, is going to collapse, bar a miracle. And the time frame, well, that's hard to estimate, but I think 1 or 2 years. I say globalism is slow creeping communism. They'll basically increase our taxes and regulators to death. I said that some years ago. We've obviously seeing that in Australia. They can't just come in and go, oh, we're going to implement Agenda 2030, World Economic Forum agenda. You'll own nothing and be happy. And we're going to take private property ownership because there'll be a revolution in the streets. But if they slowly increase the taxes and invent new taxes, like in the Gold Coast in Australia now, there's a view tax. All levels of government are getting their hands in the pie. The Gold Coast City Council will increase your rates by 40%. If you live 5 stories above or higher, whether you have an ocean view, whether your view is into another building, doesn't matter, 40% increase on tax. So elderly people that own a high-rise apartment, I mean, they can't afford those taxes. I'll have to sell. And this is what will happen. They want to charge an empty room, a Victorian tax, communist state of Victoria, charge you if you have a spare bedroom. So people are going to be strangled to death. That's how they'll take property off people, is to slow tax you. Then you have to sell your property to pay your tax, etc. So that writing's not just on the wall. That's already happening. But it's interesting to say 1 to 2 years. Dave, in your opinion, how long do Australians and Westerners have before, a major economic collapse in the West, and they won't be able to get their money out? Like right now, I've told people, you can cash out of Australia, record high property prices, or borrow against it, whatever, buy property, say in Bali as an example, or Lombok or wherever, and live like a king. But if we leave it too late, already now we notice some massive restrictions on Australians trying to send their money to countries like Indonesia. A lot of the banks are blocking it, stopping it, which is quasi capital controls already. But unfortunately, I think if people don't act, is that they'll, like Warren said there, they'll be like refugees, immigrants fleeing a country, have to leave everything behind. And then you're going to have to go and try and start a new life with nothing, when they could start a new life now, or have a plan B as an option, as somewhere they might want to live 3 months of the year or 6 months a year. And if things get really bad, cost of living in Australia or the West, they can then go and live there full time. Insurance policy. Dave, what's your view? How much time do people have, and should they be relocating themselves, all their money or some of it, out of the West?
Well, Jamie, great. Look, thanks for having me. First of all, and great to hear your comments, Warren. Very insightful. And
thanks, Dave.
Look, from what I can tell, time has already run out. The first step everyone should be making immediately, in my personal opinion, is get out of the cities. Look what's happening in the cities. The cities are becoming increasingly violent, increasingly dangerous, increasingly congested. They're absolutely saturated with electromagnetic frequencies from towers, from radiation, from 5G, from Wi-Fi. So the first thing you want to do, even before you relocate to another country, is get yourself into a smaller community where you can build community with like-minded people. But from what I can see, Jamie, everything is accelerating rapidly right now. Everything is increasing in frequency and intensity. These major events, these psychological operations, and whatever move anyone makes, they need to be in lower, less densely populated areas. Because what we're seeing in countries like Australia is that the lie of multiculturalism is being exposed. Now, there's a vast difference between multi-ethnicity, which I support. You know, my parents came here, well, my father came here as a migrant. My mother was, you know, born and raised through a long lineage of early settlers. But I'm not anti-multi-ethnicity, right? People can come to Australia from all parts of the world and get along well when there is one prevalent culture. But now you have in these cities, you have too many different cultures all being thrown into this melting pot. And say, for instance, in Melbourne, for example, look at the tensions now there with a lot of people there pushing for Sharia law from radical parts of the Islamic world. And then you've also got all of these African machete gangs, to the point it's gotten so bad with the machete violence, they've had this machete amnesty, where they're putting machete bins, thinking that these violent machete gangs are going to somehow decide, oh, look, I've been waiting for the machete bin, I'm just going to hand in my machete and no longer be a violent criminal anymore. Like, it's absolutely absurd. And so the cities are getting more and more dangerous. We're seeing a crime level here in Australia, Jamie and Warren, that we've never seen before. We're seeing home invasions, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane. Like, it's every day. And these aren't just your regular hoodlums just running in and grabbing some jewelry and some cash. They're coming in, they're violent, they're actually killing people, and there's radical decline in the quality of life here in Australia and in a lot of major Western cities that are suffering from excess immigration. That's a big part of it. And I just think you've got to find a country, and this is why Indonesia works so well, because they have a strong culture. They're not a multicultural country. Yes, there's, you know, Christians and Muslims all getting along harmoniously, but the culture is fundamentally unified. And I think if you look at somewhere like Poland, for example, they shut down immigration, they preserve their culture, and now they're becoming an absolute superpower of prosperity, of peace, of abundance. They have one of the lowest crime rates and rape rates in all of Europe. Why is that? Because they remained steadfast to their original culture. Jamie?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Dave. Makes a lot of sense. And we've seen that, and those who follow independent news and not fake news media would know that's part of the clergy plan. It's happening right on track, increasing violence, increasing printing of money to create massive inflation, record high property prices. These are all leading to where the middle class won't be able to afford, even on a salary, or both have to be working now even to afford a house, or the young people can't afford a house. They don't realize it's all being coordinated. It's not random. It's pre-planned and happening like clockwork. So those who are in the know this is happening, is doing something about it, where many still in the asleep. Let's go to a quick ad break. When we come back, I want to talk about, okay, so what do we do? If we want to relocate some of our money overseas, what are some things we can do about that? Or if we actually want to have a plan B, what are some good countries and how do we go about doing that? Just after this ad break. The McIntyre Report. Welcome back, folks, to McIntyre Report, this special educational edition, talking about should we relocate ourselves or at least some of our money out of the West, including Australia. Warren, so if we wanted to start thinking about this and taking it seriously, let's start with countries that you might consider moving to. What would be some of your top 5 countries that you probably consider as, let's say as an Australian listening, because obviously Australian National View, a lot of followers are from Australia. What's some of the countries in your top 5 that you consider relocating to?
What I'll start by saying, Jamie, just very quickly, is that anywhere other than the home country you were born in is always going to work better. It's a bit like buying a car. And to give you an example of what I mean is that if you grew up in Bali, you're going to be paying taxes to know everything about you. If you grow up in US, it's the same deal. But like, for example, Australia can be a tax haven for people who never were born here and don't live here. We've got some great exemptions. US is the same. So I start by telling people in that it's actually easier than you think it is. Because all it means is if you go anywhere other than your home country, I mean, Australia knows everything about you since the moment you were born, since the moment you basically sucked your first dummy and everything like that. And so, but in terms of specific countries, well, I always say start with countries that are close to you, that you've got people similar to you. And a good example is why I like Bali, and I'm personally doing my plan B over in Bali, is Bali is like a 3-hour flight from where I live. It's close. It's got a great culture, as has already been said by Dave, which I agree with him and by you. There's so many different parts of Bali you can go to if you like the kind of Lombok lifestyle or, you know, the new airport up north with the whole Ahmed area. You've got like Denpasar. On top of that, you've even got many of the Australian facilities which you're used to, which is what scares people from relocating. And a good example is that with Bali, my business partner, who was the most non-wanting to leave Australia, but she's left for the reasons that you and Dave have been saying, she says to me all her Pilates, her yoga, everything she does in Australia, she's found these expat communities doing that kind of stuff. So I keep it simple. I like Bali. I like Thailand because it's got the BRICS basis, so to speak. They're BRICS countries. They've got affordable property. They've got much freer lifestyles overall if you know what you're doing over there. Even New Zealand for Australians has got a 4-year tax holiday if you basically come into New Zealand. So that's another option that people have got who don't want to go too far on the East Coast. US and Florida, I know people who are going there, which is, of course, I know what you said about US. But as I told a lot of my clients, US is like lots of different small countries within one big country. And so often you can do these hiding in plain sight and stuff like that. And then, of course, you've just got places like Paraguay and Mexico, which I've had quite a lot of clients going over there. Because Paraguay and Mexico, you can get some amazing residency programs to move over there for very low cost. So, yeah, Bali, Thailand, Paraguay, Mexico, you're not even like Vanuatu, New Zealand, you're not going to go too wrong with those. And that's just a start. It's really anywhere other than Australia, I tell people you can make it work. The main thing is that you want to have the place that you're domiciled, number one, which is Australia. Number two is the place that you live, which let's say it's Bali. The place that you set up your structures, that might be Hong Kong, anywhere other than Bali, so you're not having all your money hitting Bali and falling on the tax net. And the place that you have your tax residency, which might be Paraguay, Dubai, or whatever. So there's 4 things I tell people if you're really serious about you want to tick off. But the other option is to stay put in Australia, set up your plan B in Bali, Thailand, buy a property over there, get some money set up, open an offshore bank account, get some help from someone like us or someone who knows what they're doing, and you've got your little thing ready to go. So they turn on their little AI social credit system and you can't access any of your money in Australia. At least you know you've got something, which means you won't be running out to start again. And if you don't believe that won't happen, well, you know, I've got a harbour bridge to sell you.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's very interesting. Yeah, and obviously we're very fortunate being Australian that Bali is obviously so close and very popular. Of course, Thailand's popular as well, being, you know, similar time zones. I mean, obviously Bali's the same time zone as where you are in Perth. It's one of the reasons I chose Indonesia, and I did go on the search of the planet to, you know, as soon as I could leave Australia after COVID. They wouldn't let me leave during COVID. They told me, don't bother asking again. Well, basically, as you know, in Australia, we're prisoners in our own country, completely illegal, but they did it. I looked at Spain. I looked at Portugal. I love Lisbon, Portugal, but it was going backwards the other way, being quite anti-property, banning Airbnb and banning the golden visa. Spain was one option, but, you know, very different time zone. Dubai, many people go to Dubai to live in all the time. You know, doesn't have the same vibe as a Bali. It's quite artificial in some ways. Good for maybe residencies or tax residencies. I looked at Mexico, Tulum, but for me that was a little bit dangerous. Drug cartels everywhere, machine guns, etc. I was like, I want somewhere safe. I looked at Switzerland, which is fairly neutral but cold in winter. So I was like, I want somewhere warm all year round, and that left kind of Thailand and Indonesia. And I chose Indonesia, and 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago, and have it. I love it, and that was a great decision for me. So it's different for everyone. Dave, what's some of your top choices you think would make the top 5 of countries you consider? I know you're thinking about relocating to Indonesia from Australia, so obviously that's in your top ones.
Oh, look, absolutely. I think Indonesia would be number 1 at this stage. But there's also, the Pacific Islands. The Pacific is huge, Jamie. It's the largest ocean in the world. And I'm going to be doing a trip shortly over to Rarotonga, to the Cook Islands. I've been hearing some great things about the Cook Islands as well. Would I go to Europe? Probably not. I think Europe's going to get pretty wild. But look, Europe's a big place as well. I've got good friends who are doing very well in Georgia, operating out of Tbilisi. But there's a lot of different options. I was incredibly impressed with New Zealand the other day. Like, you could disappear into the outskirts of Queenstown, have a little property, be very self-sufficient, and live a beautiful life over there in some of the most spectacular countryside in the world. But I think before even people choose a location to go to or to have a plan B, as Warren's saying, they've got to secure income that's flexible, because people often get chained to a career that ends up being the prison that they get stuck in. And if you ask the vast majority of Australians, or anyone in the Western world for that matter, why did they take the COVID shot? It was actually not for health reasons. It was primarily for financial reasons, because they were told that you can no longer earn income with your employer if you don't participate in the experiment, which is just insane. So people took that 3 or 4 shots of this mRNA experiment just to continue to have an income. And most people deeply regret that now. And so you've got to find ways of generating income on the internet, so you can go anywhere and not be dictated to by a location or by employment. And so I encourage people to look at things like drop shipping, look at things like network marketing, find something to sell on the internet, find a product, a service, or a company, or something that you can promote that you can generate income from anywhere in the world with a decent Wi-Fi connection. You could literally be on a yacht somewhere with Starlink and running your business. I think that's probably the first thing that people need to look at. How am I going to sustain myself from anywhere in the world without being a wage slave and being stuck in traffic or being pinned down or put in a cage by an employer? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a good point to raise, Dave, because I think a lot of people ask, some people don't want to leave because, one, they have family, etc., and children. It's much more difficult. Some people don't want to leave because they say they can't afford to, but my answer to that is if you remain living in the West, particularly Australia, I think is going to be hit, like Warren, I agree with Warren, harder than any other nation because it's so expensive and we're so highly taxed. They're going to feel the pain harder, that you won't be able to afford remaining in Australia. So it's not whether you want to leave or not, it's whether you'll have the choice or not. Because nothing's perfect, but a lot of people go, what will I do? And I think a lot of people, well, first of all, the easy thing for Westerners, we can cash out of our properties and buy properties, say like in Bali or Lombok, that you can make those 20% plus returns on, and you can live passively off that. But I think a lot of people underestimate is that Western IP in Australia, a very competitive market. Yes, you can become rich, but I would say it's 10 times easier to become wealthy in an emerging economy like, say, Indonesia than it is in Australia. Why? Western IP in Australia is not that valuable. Why? Because everyone has it. So you're competing with 27 million people that have Western IP. If you go take that middle-class Western IP to a third-world nation, or what was a third-world nation, say in Indonesia, you could apply that Western IP to pretty much any industry and build a successful business or career or income. I could walk into pretty much any industry in Indonesia with the knowledge I have and do quite well. Like a furniture business, you could start a furniture business. Machinery hire, I'd buy machinery and hire it to my own development companies. Why? Because the cost of renting excavators, etc., is so outrageously massive that I can buy one and pay it off in 9 months. So even if I didn't know anything about machinery, I could build a machinery leasing empire in Indonesia when just by knowing that Western IP. Makes sense? I could go and build a furniture empire in Indonesia simply by knowing how they do it in Australia, that Western IP. And that's what we used to do. We used to go to America. As Australians used to go to America, get the IP from there, the ideas, and bring it back to Australia. It worked there to work here. And a lot of things will be the same. So, and I said also there, if you look at a lot of the Russian expats that, Dave, and Warren, that live in Bali, a lot of them I've met, they work for the Russian banks. They still have their full-time job with their Russian companies, but they're able to relocate and work from Bali. A lot of companies now will allow that because they want to retain good staff rather than lose it. There's a cost of recruitment and retraining, and people work from Zoom these days. So a lot of people can keep their job and still work from overseas thanks to Zoom, which is one of the good things that come out of COVID. So I think if people think of that. So Warren, as far as if you found if people want to just relocate some of their money out of Australia, they go, look, I'm not really sure I want to leave Australia yet. Hopefully it doesn't get too bad. But what's some ways they can do, like maybe setting up bank accounts, having some money? As you say, you've highlighted there some good points before about, one, ideally not live in the country that you're born in. And then in the country you do live in, let's say you're Australian, you're born in Australia, you move to Indonesia, best not to have all your structures based and your full tax in Indonesia. You should have another country like maybe Hong Kong to set up to lower tax. You might have some local Indonesian companies, but then they will have partnerships with a Hong Kong company or wherever else. So you're separating those three, and then you might have a backup visa or residency with another country, I'm assuming. But a lot of Australians simply have Australian bank accounts and don't realize that Australia, the Reserve Bank, is the leading nation that's going to trial digital money, which will be programmable and expirable, where they'll program it to expire. So if there's a run on the banks, as you know, to stop a run on the banks, they want to switch you out to digital currencies, which I call shitcoins, basically, a central bank digital currency. Then there can no longer be a run on the bank. So instead of banks imploding in the upcoming economic crash, they'll just go, look, you can't take your money out right now. It's all under control. The government's stepping in. We're going to issue an Australian digital dollar, and your $250,000 in your bank account will be provided with $250,000 worth of digital Australian central bank coin. That's clearly what's coming. And Trump, being the Trojan horse in America, the Genius Act, is pushing that through. And then they're trying to make stable coins, and a lot of people believe crypto is going to be the savior. But I said that's like relying on the political revolution you're meant to get with MAGA. It's not going to be the same. So, but what can people do as far as getting some of their assets and their money out of the West?
I always go back to basics, because I think if you make it too hard and overwhelming for people, they just won't do it and bury their head in their Netflix. So I always say, map things out in stages like growing a business. So, for example, and I'll give you an extreme example. Let's just say that you've only got your money in one bank in Australia. Well, if that one bank has an outage, you'll get shut down. You've lost everything. So you would be diversifying across Australian banks is better than not having it at all. Then I always tell people that if you put all your money, say, in crypto and don't follow basically diversified portfolio where you invest across different things, you're making yourself vulnerable. So you just got to add the next kind of logical progression to that is jurisdictional diversification. So let's just say that you've got, say, a few different assets in Australia, you've got some cash over here, you might own some precious metals, bit of crypto, bit of shares on property or whatever. I like what you said. I think Australian property prices are pretty high, and they may go higher, but you can't tell me that this is sustainable the way it's going right now, and people can't even buy it. And you've got the younger generations who are now taking over the demographic of the elections, and the Gen Zs and the millennials screaming to take the money off the boomers. If not in the next 2 years, by next election, the party that promises socialism is certainly going to get in, because the younger generation will be screaming for it. So basically the next step is to go, right, why not open a bank account overseas? And of course, there's places like Air Wallets, as an example. They will do it if you know how to do it with them. There's going to Hong Kong and opening up one over there, or Singapore, or even in the US. So start by just opening something up over there. We're also connected with Singapore gold bullion companies, for example, like Silver Bullion, who basically are one of the most strongest, stable jurisdictions where you can own precious metals offshore and have yourself a diversified nest egg over there. And many of our clients have just gone ahead and done that. So rather than own their gold and silver in Australia and risk it being seized like they did in 1933 in America after the Great Depression, and knowing Australia's track record and what they did in COVID, we pride ourselves on being the most extreme and the most crazy. And keeping in mind we're a convict nation with pretty much no rights, no guns, no nothing. So the government can do whatever the heck they want with us. So I just tell people that we start with the basics. Start by jurisdictional diversification, having some money even in US, or having some money in Hong Kong, having some money in Singapore, opening up a bank account there, looking at setting up a gold bullion or company over there. And we can certainly help people set up a overseas company, set up a overseas bank account with that, set up an overseas silver bullion account. And the exciting news of all of that is that the government here don't care, provided you're not doing it at this stage for tax evasion or blatant avoidance. If you're just doing it to give yourself a plan B, at this time, I stress no issue. I'm sure that will change in the near future as more start doing it. But right now, it's possible. So that's a simple variant, as I put it in summary, Jamie. Just keep it simple and just progressively add stages onto your plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Warren. And I consider a lot of people will be very interested, and will make, obviously, your services available to our followers. I know many people are looking at buying property, especially Australians love Bali property or Indonesia because it's simple, and certainly diversifying your property portfolio, but also diversifying your money, not all left in a Western country, Western banks I don't trust. Also adding to that, debanking. A lot of people are being debanked in Australia and in the West, where, I mean, I've been debanked. Just Westpac sent, NAB sent me a letter last week saying they're closing my accounts. But they forget they sent me that letter 2 years ago and already have closed my accounts. But they've been debanking many people, and which is another reason not to rely on Western banks. They want to basically know everything. You try and send money, or try and get money out of even $5,000 in cash out of your bank account, you have to make an appointment and you'll be interrogated. You try and send money overseas of 100 or 200,000, often pull you into, interrogate you about your money. So the writing's on the wall. The control banks are taking over your money. So anyone, I think, just leaving all their property in Australia or all their cash and not having gold or silver or some crypto, etc., is concerning. Dave, what are your thoughts as far as, obviously you're looking at moving overseas, etc. And what do you think people really look for? Obviously, I think it's getting easier now if they're moving to a country with the expat community. I know with Marina Bay City, etc., building that whole community where they'll have access to people like Warren and our other advisors, where they can set up companies, get their visas, be introduced to potential job opportunities or networking, and basically be part of a community. I guess the freedom movement. You're someone that's very vocal and a leader in the Australian freedom movement. Are you finding, are you seeing more and more people going, actually, I do want to consider a plan B. I do actually want to consider moving out of Australia?
Oh, look, absolutely, Jamie. And I've just been looking at an article here that claims that about 140,000 millionaires in Australia are planning to have left by the end of 2025. And, smart people and smart money can see the writing on the wall. And I said in one of your posts the other day, we're in this cycle, unfortunately, in Australia of weak men and hard times. And we have incredibly weak men in the leadership here in Australia. And unfortunately, because life's been so good here for so long, there is a lot of weak men in Australian society. So we're going to have to go through this cycle of the hard times. The hard times, I don't think they can be avoided just by staying here. It's not going to happen in Australia. I think it's imperative that you have a plan B. And I think if you look at where the real opportunities are, they're in emerging markets, and they're in places that we used to be known as third world or developing. But because there's so much money pouring into these places, they're changing rapidly, just like Indonesia is. I think the Philippines is another really good example, Jamie, where there's a lot of wealth coming from the West into the Philippines. You've got 8,000 islands there. Like, that's a lot of islands. And, I think what people are looking for, to answer your question, is they're looking, first of all, for community. They're looking for lifestyle. And one thing you've pointed out to me as well, Jamie, is people want luxury, but they want it in nature. They want to get out of the hustle bustle. They don't want to be surrounded by high rise. but they want to still have access to services, to great restaurants, to nice resorts, and so on, while surrounded by nature. And you get that in Indonesia. You get that in the Philippines. You get this in these beautiful tropical locations whereby you can have community, you can have a pretty low cost of living, plenty of luxury, beautiful food, and a wonderful lifestyle. But I think one of the most important things looking forward as we get closer to 2030 and this agenda rolling out is community. Being around your tribe, like-minded people who are conscious and who can smell the BS and who are going to rally around each other, because they're going to throw more at us. Whether it's the next boogeyman, whether it's the next round of injections, whether it's digital ID or whatever, being around like-minded people is one of the most powerful things that we can do. And finding locations like you have over there, Jamie, and the community you're building in Lombok, that's a big part of a solution to a better future.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, I've been a predictor of financial trends. Many have followed my career for 25 years. I predicted the rise of Bitcoin, in 2013, told followers to jump on that. 75 US it was back then, and people did very well. I told them to obviously buy Australian property for the last 2.5 decades, and of course that's worked out well for people. But in recent times, I've told people to consider investing, diversifying out of Australian property market at its heights. It will continue to go up for a certain amount of time, but I'd hate to be starting out now in Australia and trying to get the money together to afford a property. It's just it's outrageous, the prices that they are now, and they're certainly not sustainable. But either ways, people should be having insurance policy or hedging or have a backup plan. Some people don't see the need for it yet, I think, Dave and Warren, in Australia, but that's because they're simply not aware of how bad things can get. And it's true what you said, Warren. When empires fall, they tend to fall rapidly. We only have to look at London, look what's going on in France, Germany, Sweden, America. That's the future for Australia. If we, the world, and a lot of people say, why don't you stay and fight for your country, etc. I mean, I spent a decade of spending millions of dollars fighting for my country. We have to accept what we can and can't control. And of course, we'd all patriots, we all love to see our country be put on the right track. But some of that is outside our control. And I think the people are going to help create a political revolution. Generally, the people that leave their country and do it from outside, the safety of being outside their country. Ironically, Australian National Review studios are based in Indonesia. I can speak freely in Indonesia politically. I can't speak that freely in Australia because I know right now I don't go back to Australia. I could, but I just know that I'll likely be harassed at the airport and tied up in legal cases or pursued for either anti-Semitic speech or whatever they'll come up with, and jailing people that are protesters. So the point is the freedoms and censorship in Australia is reducing. The freedoms and removal of censorship in emerging markets is getting better. So a lot of countries, I think, even look at Indonesia, very traditional values, family values, very friendly people, authentic, happy. And why are they so much happy? Well, they don't have mortgages, most of them. They don't have high tax rates. They live in beautiful sunshine. They have good family values, good communities. Not perfect, but live in a warm climate that makes people happy. So all these things contribute to a happier lifestyle. And I think ultimately we want to enjoy our life and make the most of it. So that's obviously why I made my decision to leave, not because I don't love my country, but because I think we should all leave our village and leave our city. And if that means leaving our country for some time, we can always go back. Is that true? So thank you guys for today. I appreciate your input. Those who want to find out more about, maybe Warren being able to help set up those structures, etc., relocate your money out, will provide Warren's contact details. But of course, you can contact us as well, and we can help you with sharing and joining a community. That's why we're building these expat cities, first one in Lombok, and then we'll build others around the world. It's really to create an environment, a community for the freedom movement, a freedom city based on wellness and health in nature, a like-minded community where people can live part of the year or all the year, and a great safe area outside of the declining West. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time. Thanks, Warren. Thanks, Dave. And we'll see you on a future episode, because I can tell a lot of people would like to go deeper on all of these topics and learn even more.